In today's video, I'm going to ask you to think. I just wanted to get that out of the way.
And I'm very proud before the Judiciary Committee that before he testified, he said to me, Madam Speaker, do you think that I can tell George's daughter that his name will be always remembered because you'll name the bill for him? And I said, well, I'll recommend that to the Judiciary Committee and to the Congressional Black Caucus who have shaped the bill. But I only will do that if you tell me that this legislation is worthy of George Kirby's name. George Kirby's name.
Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultants channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And today I want to talk in particular about communism. Just a little bit, because there's so much that could be said. But got to do a little housekeeping first, a couple of just random things I had sitting here. The first thing I'd just like to point out is that at the present time in the Atlantic Ocean, let's see, what does it say? I put my eyes on here. There are no tropical cyclones in the Atlantic at this time. So according to this chart from the National Hurricane Center, there are no tropical cyclones in the Atlantic at this time. Now, we just finished up here 2 or 3 week heat wave, which is going to start again about 3 days from now. Some really bad storms across the country, things like that. So I just wanted to point out that there are no tropical cyclones in the Atlantic at this time. The reason I want to mention that is so that hopefully you will remember that when later during the hurricane season, when we will have hurricanes, which is what happens during hurricane season, you see. That's why they call it hurricane season. See, hurricanes happen. It's just kind of part of the way the planet works. Because when the hurricanes happen, people are going to crawl out of the woodwork going, see, we told you, global warming, climate change, we told you. It's all because of your hair dryer, or whatever. Anyway, I just wanted to point out that at the present time, in the height of summer, with all the storms and the heat wave and everything, there are no tropical cyclones whatsoever in the Atlantic Ocean at this time. Okay, so just remember that. Second, let me see here. I gotta bring up the next one. Well, second, actually, it's just a little quick discussion again. In my video beginning with where I talked to Colin Kaepernick, at the very beginning I mentioned briefly a couple reasons why I had not made a video in 4 or 5 weeks after I went back to work from the stay-at-home order. I thought I'd just throw in one more of the reasons for that, because, that was also the time that all of these, with George Floyd started, the protests and the riots, and autonomous zones, stuff that is going to go down in history as mind-numbingly stupid. When I started working after college, my first job, I worked with another guy, and this guy, he was on the tail end of punk rock. He actually had a real mohawk. He wasn't punk rock like Dead Kennedys or something. Again, it was kind of dying out, but he was trying. He was a really nice guy, though. Really smart. No tattoos. Really smart guy. And one thing he said to me, I never forgot. His name was John. And he said, the only thing I ask out of life is, as I start working and having a job, is that I never have to work for stupid people. And specifically what he was talking about is the thing he couldn't take was having stupid people call him stupid or imply that he's stupid. And that's kind of a vicious circle, because one of the aspects, one of the characteristics of stupidity is that stupid people generally think they're quite smart. So it's a tough one to get out of. When you look at things like what happened with George Floyd and the protests and the riots, toppling statues, Chaz/Chad, and now pretty much the same thing going on in Portland. When you look at all that stuff, the magnitude of stupidity involved in all of this it's just so much and so overwhelming. I thought it was best to just sit back and wait, kind of see what happens before I even comment on it. I mean, what's the point? I can go into theory of stupidity or psychology of stupidity or something, but there just wasn't any point. I mean, sometimes things that are going on are just so dumb and the people involved are so mind-numbingly stupid. I just don't want to waste my time with it. So that's another reason why I didn't make videos for such a long time. Just to give you one really quick example, and again, please, we're talking about stupidity here, so please don't let yourself be sucked into that kind of thinking stupidity. Hear what I'm saying. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Okay, as I say this. George Floyd. I never saw the whole video. I think it was 8 minutes and 46 seconds or something. They kept making a big production about this. You know, we have to kneel for 8 minutes and 46 seconds or something. The only videos I saw online were about 2 minutes long. They were filmed by a teenager. And I didn't like what I saw. I don't think a police officer should be sticking his knee on someone's neck anyway. They should be restraining your appendages. But having said that, throughout the whole videos that I saw, I just heard George Floyd, who was hopped up on drugs, among other things. That's why they called the police. He passed a fake $20 bill, which is a crime, and then he was out of his mind on drugs, and he's behind the wheel of a car, so he could kill hundreds of people, possibly, if he wanted to drive through a crowd, for example. And that's why they called the police, you see. He was a menace to society. The thing was, throughout the whole video I watched, George Floyd's there just going, "Oh, mama, I can't breathe," and he's yelling out all this stuff, and the only thing I'm thinking the whole time is, well, if he can't breathe, then he couldn't yell all this stuff, because you have to have a lot of airflow to be able to project that loudly. If you can't breathe, then you'd be more like, "I can't breathe, mama." That's what you would be saying. But that's not what you saw. What you heard was the guy going, "I can't breathe! Oh, God!" And it's like, you try that. I mean, just put your hands on your throat like this, and I mean, you can hardly yell out and scream, and everything's distorted. Now, I don't know what happened in the other minutes that are not seen in that video, and obviously something happened, but the thing that comes to mind is if you're hopped up on drugs like that, so your heart's already racing and beating, he apparently had a heart problem, I believe, to begin with, and then he puts himself through all of that. He's being restrained, and he sits there and he's resisting, if only with his mouth. It's possible that that contributed to his demise. I mean, the smart thing to do if you're in a situation like that is to not yell and scream, not put stress on your respiratory system, things like that. But you would have to not be on drugs to realize that that's a smart thing to do. And I'm not sitting here, again, don't hear what I'm not saying, hear what I am saying. Okay, because what I'm not saying George Floyd was responsible for his own death or killed himself or something like that. I'm saying that his own behavior could very well have been a factor in this. Again, with the caveat that I would never want to see a police officer restraining someone at the neck anyway. But apparently that was taught as a procedure. It wasn't like this officer just decided to do it on his own. And that's a procedural problem that they need to fix. You restrain people at the appendages. That's where they can hurt you. They're not going to hurt you at the neck, other than yelling like that. So anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. One reason I haven't made videos in so long is because everything going on lately has been mind-bogglingly stupid. I mean, defund the police. I mean, of all the... I mean, I don't even know how to go there. How do you go to a place like that? That's so fundamentally dumb and counterproductive and suicidal. And there isn't any teeny-weeny aspect of that idea that makes rational sense or benefits anybody except really rotten people who want to destroy your society by, say, I don't know, getting rid of police protection, getting rid of law and order. But as far as the people who actually live in this country, not George Soros or Clintons or people who really aren't really fond of this place, But the people who want to destroy the nation, they're going to try to incite all this kind of stuff by various means. And the people who are easily, you know, dancing like a marionette while those guys are pulling the strings from over in, you know, wherever in Europe, how do I comment on that? So that's one reason I didn't make a video. Anyway, today what I want to talk about is communism. And I could talk about communism a whole lot more than I'm going to today. There's just one thing I want to read to you, and you may have heard of this, you may have not heard of this, called the 45 Goals of Communism. Now, just a brief background on this. What happened was, in January of 1963, okay? The congressman here in Florida, Prolong, he read into the Congressional Record a statement, and the statement was 45 Goals of Communism. Now, the reason that's significant is because when someone says, well, this person wrote this or this person said this, especially today in the internet era and with the electronics and computers, you have to do so much research to find out, you know, if you hear a quotable quote, you know, well, Mark Twain once said such and such, you just don't know if he really said it or not. You got to go out and research it. It's really hazardous territory nowadays to say, well, so-and-so said this, here's a quote from them. If you see those little quotes and they show a picture of somebody and their name, you assume that at some point they said it, but it could have just been made up out of whole cloth. Or it might have been someone else who said it. What's that one that's always misattributed to people? Those who do not learn from history are condemned to repeat it. I mean, that thing's been attributed to everyone who's lived in the last 3,000 years, I think. Okay. So, what makes this significant is that the Congressional Record is a record. You know, when they're in session at Congress, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, there's, just like in a courtroom, there's people writing down every word that's said. And that is an official document. It officially documents the fact that this was, in fact, said at that time in that place. So, in other words, there's no doubt when it's put into the Congressional Record. What is in the Congressional Record is there's such a chain of command of chain of possession of the documents. This was in fact said. That's what makes this important. This was entered by a United States representative into the Congressional Record in January of 1963. All right, that's the main issue here. Now, I'm just going to read you the intro real fast. It's a really, really short intro, 2 sentences basically. So what Congressman Prolong said was, Mr. Speaker, Mrs. Patricia Nordman of DeLand, Florida, is an ardent and articulate opponent of communism, and until recently published the DeLand Courier, which she dedicated to the purpose of alerting the public to the dangers of communism in America. At Mrs. Nordman's request, I include in the record, the Congressional Record, under unanimous consent, the following current communist goals, which she identifies as an excerpt from The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen. Okay? So that's what he said, and then he just listed out the 45, and that's all there is to this thing. I'll read the 45 in a moment. But let me point out what he's doing. Basically, there's this woman who had her own kind of self-published publication alerting people to the dangers of communism in 1963, which is basically the height of the Cold War. Remember, this Cuban Missile Crisis had just happened. Cuba had been taken over by Castro, communism, right off the coast of Florida. The Cold War was in full throttle. It was really taken off. It had only been a few years since Russia had detonated the hydrogen bomb. And they detonated that because they got the technology from, who was it, the Rosenbergs, American spies, who were the last American spies guilty of subversion, who were executed for that crime. Which is one of the problems we have today, is that we don't execute people who do that, who betray their country. Okay, look at my videos about what Governor Tim Walz has been doing. I mean, nothing's happening to the guy. But by all rights, he should, when you do something that is that fundamentally opposed to our way of life and especially our law, and I could care less if Attorney General Ellison says it's lawful. That doesn't mean anything to me. I don't have the photo with me of Ellison holding, what was it, the Antifa's terrorism cookbook or whatever, and smiling. Ellison's opinion doesn't mean anything to me. People who support terrorists are guilty of subversion and should be held accountable according to these laws. In other words, there should be a second noose next to Waltz's. There should be one for Ellison if you're going to support terrorism in the United States of America, domestic terrorism. That's my opinion. Should be done lawfully, of course. I'm not talking about lynching. That's stupidity in its own. I'm talking about through our lawful processes, but we lost that over the last 60 years. So the ones who gave Russia the nuclear bomb are the last ones who were killed in America, who were executed for what they did. They started the Cold War, and they could have destroyed the entire human species. That's how stupid those people were when they betrayed their country. And that's why they hang by the neck until they were dead. What's going on today, some of the things that are being requested, like, I don't know, defunding the police, for example, is so monumentally stupid and dangerous to our entire species, certainly to our country, that the people responsible for it should be held accountable for their subversion, which is what the Rosenbergs were convicted of and executed for. But we're not doing that, are we? And that's the problem. There has to be law and order. And the reason is because, kind of what I talked about with Colin Kaepernick, the beauty of the U.S. Constitution and the United States of America is that it's founded on principles that are kind of, they're not ideological at all. They allow for people to have freedom of thought, freedom of expression. You can talk about things like, you can even talk about communism. If you believe in communism, you can talk about it. You can form organizations. You can do all of these things, but you just can't go beyond the bounds of law and order. Law and order is meant to protect you. It's one thing to go out there and tell people your ideas about communism and try to convert them. It's another thing to go out there and do that and say, well, if you don't accept what I'm saying, I'm burning your house down and I'm killing your child. You see, that's what law and order does. It prevents that from happening. What happened in the past for thousands of years, for all of human history recorded, was that some tyrant or some emperor or king or something of that nature, or even in Rome, with the Senate, they would basically say, well, these isms are okay to talk about, these ideas. These isms are not, and we just arbitrarily say so. We're in charge. It's up to us. It's not like anybody can talk about anything you want to. You can talk about this Greek philosophy, and you can talk about this Middle Eastern religious idea, but you can't talk about this. You talk about this, that's the end of it. You're going to prison. All right, we're shutting you down, taking all your stuff and splitting your family up around the world. That's the way it was before the United States of America, essentially. The United States of America created documents that created a solid, rock, steel-reinforced, solid foundation for a nation by being so minimalistic. It only addressed the things that will cause problems in a situation like that, such as, oh, I just told you what I believe, you decided not to accept it, therefore I'm going to kill you. It prevents that from happening. I'm going to go burn your house down and tip over cars, and I'm going to go loot a Target because you didn't like what I had to say, even though what I had to say was monumentally stupid. Okay, see, in our country, it's designed in such a way that you're free. You're free. You have liberty to go out and say something monumentally stupid. And when you do that, other people around you get to observe this, and then they know that you're stupid. You see, that's the beauty of it. Because it's a good thing. If that person's stupid, I need to know this before I put my trust in them, before I let them babysit my kids, before I let them drive the bus I'm on the edge of cliffs on the California coast. Okay, I need to know that that person's an idiot. And freedom of speech allows you to do that. So if someone comes out and says, well, those damn black people, smelly, lazy bums, you see, I want them to be able to say that, because then I know what they are. I know that they're just an idiotic racist. But if you prevent them from saying it, then I don't know exactly what they think about things, do I? The United States of America gave you freedom of all this expression, freedom of assembly, something that people like Governor Walz has just arbitrarily killed, unconstitutional. You can't get together anymore. You got to isolate yourselves, right? Social distancing. All these things were put into place by the Constitution, which again is only 4 pages long because that's all it takes to define that rock-solid foundation. But beyond that, it allows everyone really just unprecedented freedom in this world. And that freedom is what allows people to go out and they can say what's on their mind. And they either, by their own actions and their own speech, they demonstrate to the world, is this person competent? Is this person stable? Whether I agree with them or disagree with them, I mean, are they at least using reason? Are they using laws of logic? Or are they just completely living in a fantasy land and channeling aliens and spirits from the dead? I mean, what you got to give them the freedom to express themselves for you to determine that about them. And then people hear this marketplace of ideas and they change and they morph and they grow. I mean, I look at some of the things I believed in when I was a child, and that's why I was a child. And I'm not saying everything I believe right now won't change in the future as well, but you do kind of start to converge on some simple truth as you get older. Just undeniable truth that actually exists in the world. The problem with things like communism is that one of their principles is that there's no such thing as truth. Okay, everything's relative. Basically, might makes right. We're in charge, so we tell you what's true, and you will believe it, or you're going to die, or you're going to go to a camp in Siberia and crack rocks open with a hammer for the rest of your life without eating. You see, that's how communism is. Any of these countries that formed a communism, the first thing the leaders did was wipe out a large portion of their own population. It was about, 50 million of them in Russia. 50 million people that Stalin in particular just wiped out. So they don't even know the numbers in China, but I've heard it between about 60 and 80 million people in China. Okay? And then you look at how many people Castro killed. All these, whenever you have these communist nations, that is what communism is. Might makes right. And one of the principles is that there's no such thing as absolute truth, and particularly a moral truth like you would get from, say, a Bible, for example, which was the foundation of America. So when they have things like freedom or what they call, I don't want to get into separation of church and state right now. That's a whole other story. But if you look at the First Amendment, it doesn't say anything about separation of church and state. It just says Congress shall pass no law establishing a religion. You see, back then, it wasn't about Christianity versus Islam versus Buddhism and Hinduism. It was Catholicism versus various denominations of Protestantism. Okay, and the whole point of the First Amendment was that no one of these can become the official American religion. There's just the Congress cannot just establish the religion. But they were talking about different denominations. It can't be Catholic versus Baptist versus Mormon versus whatever. That's what the First Amendment was about. But it was meant to keep government out of religion. Well, being out of religion also means that if I want to go stick a cross on public property, the government stays out of it. It means out of religion, you see. But communism's a whole other story. Communism, everything's in. The government is in everything. They're in your life. They dictate the terms of existence of your life. And it's supposed to benefit everybody, the great masses who are exploited by the capitalists, the ones who are free, like in my Colin Kaepernick video, how I showed you these black people who are so oppressed. They're astronauts, doctors, chemists, the list goes on so long, I'm not going to waste my time with it. And the reason they are those things is because they had the opportunity to become those things. And rather than going out with a gun and robbing a liquor store or doing what George Floyd did and passing fake $20 bills, those black people did the work necessary to become a doctor or a chemist or what have you. And yes, maybe not everyone at every economic level can do that, but that's true for white people, for Hispanic, for Native American, for anybody. That's a poverty issue. but you can still do great things with your life even from that level. It's your choice whether you go out with a gun and you just start gangbanging or you do something productive with your life. It's your choice. Society didn't do it to you. In America. Under communism, it's a whole other story. If the communists say, well, your family has offended our sensibilities, it basically becomes a caste system. If your family is allowed to survive, which they may not, if they're allowed to survive, they're not going anywhere. Your opportunity to become a doctor or a chemist or whatever you want to do, an astronaut or a president, is gone. And you're not going to be a chemist, a doctor, period, because someone else is dictating it. You see, that's the fundamental difference here. So I'm not going to go into a big deal of what communism is. I grew up in the era of the Cold War, so I heard propaganda from both sides growing up. But again, I've studied propaganda. It's one of the main things I've studied for so long, really, since I began my adult life. And frankly, even in high school, there were a lot of things that I learned that just didn't make a lot of sense, and I would research them. So what I want to do is just read you these 45 goals of communism. Now, I want to make it perfectly clear, as I said in the beginning, these were, in fact, documented, read into the Congressional Record in 1963. First thing. Second thing is, point out what... So this congressman is doing this at the request of a woman who had this publication where she was warning people about the dangers of communism. She asked him to insert this list of goals that came from another person's book into the Congressional Record, and that's what he did. So these 45 goals are from a book called The Naked Communist by a man named Cleon Skousen. Now, I don't want to go too much into this, but you've seen in my videos, especially on junk science, how I tell you how, say, like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great if you want to know Justin Bieber's birthday. But if anything that's remotely controversial, or an individual who is controversial, or an individual who goes against the kind of stupidity we've seen lately, this far left idiocy, they get wiped out and whitewashed, and you can't trust anything that's said on Wikipedia about them. So if you go to the Wikipedia page about Cleon Skousen, it's not very flattering, right? And the thing is, it would take a lifetime of research to figure out if anything in that Wikipedia page is even true. You can't trust it. But here's my point. It doesn't matter. Now, Skousen was briefly a FBI agent, special agent. He was a Mormon. There was a whole bunch of things with him. It doesn't matter. This isn't about Cleon Skousen. What I'm trying to say is that in the year 1963, anybody, in this case several people, if not many people, were concerned about these 45 things. Now why? Because when you see them, you're gonna, this is where I asked you to think in this video. As you hear these 45 things, you just gotta think about them and ask yourself, well, gee, if this happens, if this goal, what they're calling a goal of communism happens, is that good for the country, or is that like really, really bad for the country? Is it good for me and my family, or is it really bad? Does it have the potential to cause some very serious problems for my children and grandchildren? And I think you're going to agree, regardless of all the smokescreen they put up to cloud the issue of where these 45 things came from, the fact that they were read in 1963 is what's significant, because every one of them is clearly a danger to freedom and liberty and opportunity and to human life once you understand what communism is. Remember, 50 million dead in Russia, 60 to 80 million dead hundreds of millions of people wiped out just as soon as the communists take over. And it's their own people. They're not invading another country and killing everyone. That's their own people. In other words, if these people, these little children over here in Seattle, in Portland, if they took control of everything, do you not think they would take everyone who they regard as an enemy and round them up into camps and they're gone, one way or another? These people are crazy. See, there isn't a whole lot of a different line between stupidity and crazy, at least learned stupidity, not biological. Anyway, so the point is these 45 Goals of Communism are bad. Whether they're coming from communism or if it's Baptists who are proposing these, if the Bible proposed these, if Sammy Davis Jr. proposed these, it doesn't matter who's proposing them. That's not the point. The point is they're bad, they're dangerous, they're stupid, they're gonna hurt us badly. And this was posted to the Congressional Record in 1963, right before President Kennedy was shot, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we had that standoff with the Soviet Union that could have led to a war. And we stood strong. And the Russians backed down. Remember that. That's relevant in one of these. So now, let me go through the 45. I'm going to try my best not to comment too much, but it's hard not to. Number 1. Remember, Goals of Communism. Number 1, U.S. acceptance of coexistence as the only alternative to atomic war. Okay? Number 2, U.S. willingness to capitulate in preference to engaging in atomic war. Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis, probably more than putting missiles in Cuba, was meant to force America to humiliate itself among the world and back down out of fear of starting a nuclear war. But President Kennedy did not allow that. He stood up and he said, if we have to, we will go to war. But you are not putting those nukes 60 miles away from American citizens. And I'm the president, and I'm telling you, you're not going to do that. My job's to defend these people. And it was risky, and it was an impossible situation for him. But we did it. But their goal was to get the U.S. to be willing to capitulate to avoid atomic war. That's number 2. But we didn't fall for it back then. It was a different time back then. Number 3, develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. In other words, we get rid of all of our weapons, our big weapons, nuclear weapons in particular, and we're doing it to show our moral strength, which is just wonderful. You know, I can go stand up on my soapbox and I demonstrate my moral strength, and then somebody who has military strength just shoots me and I'm gone. And there goes all my moral strength. 6 feet underground. You see, that's a stupid thing. It's a really, really dumb thing. When there are legitimate, real threats out there of people who say, like Iran right now, for example, death to America, death to America. They've been saying that for 40 years. And their actions seem to demonstrate that they are, in fact, trying to cause death to America. And then you get someone like Obama who says, well, here, have a couple $1 billion in cash and have fun building this nuclear weapon. Whereas Trump says, no, you're not going to do that. All right? That's an illusion that disarmament gives you moral strength. I wish it wasn't that way. I wish we could disarm. I really do. I wish you didn't need weapons. But there's a real world out there. Not the illusion, but the real world that we live in. And we have to be able to defend ourselves against countries who have the capability themselves to wipe out the whole world many times over. And we can't do that by throwing all our weapons away. Just like you can't defend American citizens by getting rid of the Second Amendment. That's mind-bogglingly stupid. You know that church in Texas where the gunman came in there and he pulls out his gun, he shoots someone standing right next to him. He took maybe 3 or 4 steps, and before he could get off the next shot, the people who were armed in there and trained shot him, and he's gone. So instead of him wiping out the whole church, and that was the end of it. It was completely over. Can you imagine if that happened in these school shootings where you get, 20 students shot? What if only one got shot and then the people who were armed in there took the gunman out? It's all over. Those other 19 children get to go on and live their lives. Monumentally stupid idea here. Number 4, permit free trade between all nations regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not items could be used for war. Remember Obama sending all this stuff? Clintons did that too. They're sending over stuff that can be used to make weapons of mass destruction. They're selling it to these countries that have sworn to destroy us. You know, Iraq, Iran, those kinds of things. Communist nations. Permit free trade. Gee, what was Bill Clinton's first claim to fame as president other than Chinagate, where the Chinese money basically got him elected? Well, it was NAFTA, wasn't it? It was these free trade agreements. And everybody stood up and said, this is suicidal. This is so monumentally stupid. No rational person would do this. And if you look at Bill Clinton himself, you look at the videos back then where he's defending himself, nothing he says makes any rational sense. He doesn't even have an argument. He's just spitting out these high and mighty sounding platitudes. But he can't reason anything. He can't say, well, if we do this, then that will happen, which causes this, and there's the end result we want. He doesn't do that. He's just sitting there spitting out a bunch of rhetoric to justify it, when any rational person could see that, well, that's going to take away all these American jobs. That's going to take away all the American workers' ability to compete, which is what keeps their wages up. Not some minimum wage where you go in at the end of a gun and tell an employer, you will pay them this whether you have the money or not. And if your company just fails and everyone loses their job, so be it. Because we're really stupid, you see, and we put a gun to your head and told you to do that. No, Bill Clinton just said, well, we're going to take this incredibly strong economy in America and we're just suddenly going to spread it around the whole world. So now all these American workers have to compete with people who are willing to work for 10 cents an hour, because that's about 10 cents an hour more than they were getting before. Permit free trade between all nations. That was 1963, 30 years before Bill Clinton took on the power to pass NAFTA and other trade agreements. One of my existential threats to America is suicidal trade agreements. Number 5, extension of long-term loans to Russia and Soviet satellites. Isn't it fascinating? These guys are the communists. They know how to run the world. They know how to do it right. Everyone else is wrong. Their ideology, amongst all the ideologies that have ever existed, is right, and everybody else is wrong. And we're so certain of this that we're going to come begging you for loans, because we're not really making any money over here in our Soviet society. In fact, it's really a toilet. So we need your money to help us spread this perfect ideology. You see how it works, right? Kind of like these people in Seattle who took over the autonomous zone. Their first thing was to demand that people send them food and cigarettes, because these idiots weren't even capable of taking care of themselves. But they knew it all. They have all the answers, right? 1963, this was entered into the record. Number 6, provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination. Again, America is the most generous nation the world has ever known. The amount of money that we send in foreign aid for different purposes, yes, some of it gets misappropriated. Yes, sometimes when it lands at a dock, the local authorities pocket it. That happens in Palestine, or what they call Palestine all the time, you know, Gaza and the West Bank. Every time we send money there, the authorities grab it. And that's why they live in great mansions. And then they sit there and they complain and moan to the world about how everyone's impoverishing and keeping the Palestinians down after we send them $1 billion. And all of a sudden the leaders of Hamas are $1 billion richer and everyone else is hungry. All right, so provide American aid to all nations. Again, it's the Soviet Union, it's the communists saying, well, we're right, but America's actually successful. They're wrong. Americans don't know what they're doing, but they've got all this money and prosperity and strength and power, and everything's really going really well for them. But we're right, not them. So we need them to give us all their money, because we don't have any, even though we're right and what we do works. You see how you see how human stupidity could become one of my 50 existential threats to the United States of America. Yes. Number 7, grant recognition of Red China. Admission of Red China to the United Nations. Did that happen? Red China. Have we heard about China in the news lately at all? See, I seem to recall hearing about China in the news going at least back to when they helped Bill Clinton get elected president of the United States, who then turned around and sent the United States on a course that destroyed much of the American economy and the American worker and built up China into what it is today. This is 1963. Did that happen? Oh yeah, it did. China, who has sworn to take over everything, and they have the patience to do it. If you know the history of China, they don't have to get their goals met today. It isn't immediate gratification for them like it is for spoiled Americans. They're willing to take a generation or two or three or four, if need be, as long as they're victorious in the end. And everything they're doing, with the help of people like Bill and Hillary Clinton, and many others, has put them in a position where they could do that. 30 years ago, China was a gargantuan rice paddy. And now, thanks to them stealing all of our technology and making all of our products, China is now a threat to the world. Probably a worse threat than the Soviet Union ever was. And I was warning about that back when Clinton was president, and everyone laughed at me. Once again, time revealed who was right and who was wrong. Number 8, set up East and West Germany as separate states in spite of Khrushchev's promise in 1955 to settle the German question by free elections under the supervision of the United Nations. In other words, Khrushchev said, well, I'm going to let the German people decide what they want to do. But what the communist goal says is set up East and West Germany as separate states. Have you ever heard of the Berlin Wall? It was about 2 years after Colin Kaepernick was born, when I was an adult, that I saw the Berlin Wall fall. But prior to that, that had separated, and that's not a wall for immigration purposes. That's a wall so that all these people who are suffering under communism in East Germany can't run away to freedom in West Germany, which was a Western nation, like America is. That's what the wall was for. It was to keep these people in. Nobody else wanted to go. Why would you want to go to East Germany? Why would you want to go to a place where they shoot your family in the head? Where the Stasi is spying on you at all times? The Stasi, which is kind of comparable to Google, for example, in terms of surveillance. All right, number 9. Prolong the conferences to ban atomic tests because the United States has agreed to suspend tests as long as negotiations are in progress. In other words, the United States tells the truth. They're reliable. They're not a bunch of liars and backstabbers. They said that they are going to suspend their own atomic tests as long as we're negotiating these test bans. And we believe them because they're reliable. But we, the communists, are just a bunch of backstabbing liars. Nothing that comes out of our mouth is the truth, unless telling the truth is a manipulative tactic. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and carry on our tests, but we're going to try to drag on these negotiations because we can trust the United States not to do these tests during that period. See, the difference between a communist nation and a nation that has not gone certifiably insane. Number 10, allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the United Nations. Remember, when Russia became the Soviet Union, one of the first things it did was went out and took over all these little, stands, Kurdistan and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and all these. And of course, as soon as the Soviet Union fell, those nations fled as fast as they could for their lives, because communism was made a whole generation's life not worth living. Well, what this says is allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the United Nations. So even though they're the Soviet Union and they're a part, all these stands and everything in Belarus and all Estonia, all of these are really part of the Soviet Union, but we want them to have individual representation at the United Nations. You see. In other words, all of a sudden, instead of just one Soviet Union having a vote in the United Nations, you've got all of these different countries having votes. And, of course, they're going to vote the same way the Soviet Union tells them to, aren't they? Because it's a communist nation, that's how they work, is at the end of a gun. A mind-numbingly stupid idea. Number 11, promote the United Nations as the only hope for mankind. Gee, have they done that over the last 40 years? Don't forget, the United Nations includes, like, the World Health Organization, which you might have heard of lately with COVID-19, that kind of thing. if its charter is rewritten, demand that it be set up as a one-world government with its own independent armed forces. In other words, a world government. The United States no longer exists as a sovereign nation. These people over here in Europe are going to tell us how to live. Now, have they been trying to do that? Is that what they've been trying to do with the United Nations? Praise God, they have been failing miserably because nothing they do works. Communism has never worked. Every time they try it, it turns into a nightmare for everyone involved except for the cream of the crop at the top, who live like emperors. Alright, number 12, resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. In the United States, of course. Resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Now, that's tricky business because in a free country you shouldn't outlaw any party. But there comes a point when, I mean, and that's the tough part. That's the balance that's so difficult. You can't, once you allow them to outlaw one political party, they can outlaw all of them, right? In theory. But what if you have a party that is so mind-bogglingly stupid and dangerous that it consumes all of our national resources with fighting against people who want to basically just blow us all up in their own stupidity? They're a complete idiot. They think that they're going to save the world by strapping on a bunch of dynamite and going into a crowd and blowing themselves up. They think they're going to save the world by doing that. But all those other people are going to die. At what point do you have to step in and stop that from happening? What point do you have to restrict one person's freedom to save all these other people from monumental stupidity of one person, one idiot? And that's the battle that the United States has fought all along, because we believe in absolute freedom, and we should. So I don't think we should outlaw the Communist Party. I think let communists say what they want, because they show how stupid they are whenever they open their mouths. And they have nothing to back up what they say. Every time they implement communism, it's a bitter failure. Again, if Bill Clinton hadn't basically been the president of China for 8 years, giving everything we had to China in the 90s, China would be a gigantic rice paddy today. As it was back then. It wouldn't be a technological wonder. They had to steal all of our patents to get that. They had to steal all of our technology, courtesy of people like the Clintons and George Soros and all these others. Number 13, do away with all loyalty oaths. I'll just refer you to my video to Colin Kaepernick. An oath such as the Pledge of Allegiance, such as singing the national anthem, such as saluting the flag. Need I say more? This was 1963. Goals of Communism. Number 14, continue giving Russia access to the U.S. Patent Office. What did I just say about China? Every time a company goes over to China and says, we want you to build our little box, our little black box, China has it in the contract, you will give us all of the design, not just design specifications, but you'll give us the blueprints, you'll basically give us the patent, you'll give us everything we need to replicate it ourselves. If, like in music, where I'm in music, they have something called Gibsons. Gibson guitars are among the best in the world. They're an American special. Very special American company, Gibson guitars. Well, now there's Gibsons, these China Gibsons, because guess what? They can go over there, and Gibson made the mistake at some point of allowing maybe Epiphone guitars to be built in China. Well, now China has all the technology to build essentially a Gibson guitar. So what do? They build it. They build it, and they might even put the word Gibson on there, and then they sell it through eBay through these scam companies. So someone spends $4,000 on a guitar that costs about $200 to build, they think they have a Gibson, and then when they hand it off to their children as an heirloom, valued at $4,000, increasing in value, and then at some point someone goes to sell it and they say, what are you talking about? This is a cheap Chinese knockoff. This isn't a Gibson. Oh. Now imagine that happening with every bit of technology in our world today. That's what the Clintons gave to China. And that's what they were talking about in 1963. Give Russia access to all U.S. patents, because the Russians can't do anything right themselves. Communists can't do anything right. They have to steal technology from countries that do things right, like the United States of America. Number 15, capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Gee, have communists captured one or both of the political parties in the United States of America? This is where I'll let you think. Number 16, use technical decisions of the courts to weaken basic American institutions by claiming their activities violate civil rights. Have you heard a lot of hullabaloo about civil rights lately? I'm not talking about the American civil rights movement, which I love. Again, I have so much respect for Malcolm X and all these people who took the American civil rights movement because they were legitimately concerned with equality and the rights of all people, regardless of their color or what have you. But once you start exploiting this whole idea of civil rights, so that instead of building other people up and giving them rights, you're taking everyone else's rights away, at that point, you're the problem. You're the problem, not someone who you accuse of violating civil rights. You are the problem. They were encouraging back here in this one to use the courts in America. Have you ever heard the phrase liberal courts? See, it's a big, big, big problem. To weaken basic American institutions by claiming that their activities violate civil rights. Every institution we have out there, what about this stuff with the police? What's their big issue? They're claiming that the police violate civil rights of certain individuals, certain groups. So we need to defund them. We need to weaken them. We need to make sure that people no longer have respect for them, no longer support the police. That is number 16 of the communist goals, read into the Congressional Record in 1963. They're still at it, folks. Number 17, get control of the schools. Gee, have they done that? Use them as transition belts for socialism and current communist propaganda. Gee, have they done that? Soften the curriculum. Have they done that? Have they done that? What I learned in school is today what a student might learn after 4 years of college. What I learned in high school. And what I learned in high school was probably what my parents' generation learned by the 8th grade. Soften their curriculum. Get control of teachers' associations, teachers' unions. Didn't I mention that when I talked about the rotten education system as an existential threat to America? Put the party line in textbooks. It's all over in the textbooks. Remember, education is no longer about teaching knowledge and life skills so that you can be a competent, independent citizen. It's about teaching ideology and indoctrinating people. Number 18, gain control of all student newspapers. Do some research on that. I mean, find me a student newspaper out there where someone's allowed to tell the truth. Number 19, use student riots to foment public protests against programs or organizations which are under communist attack. In other words, programs or organizations which the communists are attacking, use student riots to create public protests against them. Have you seen that lately? 1963, folks. That's when the warning, that's when the alarm was sounded. The trumpet was sounded, the flags were waved. But did people listen, or did they go to Woodstock and smoke pot, like Governor Tim Walz wants people to do? Oh man, there's a world going on out there somewhere, but I don't really care, man. Whatever, let them do their thing. I don't care. I'm so baked. Governor Tim Walz. Can't imagine who elected that guy. Number 20, infiltrate the press. Gee, maybe there's a reason why the word fake news has come up in recent times. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, policy making decisions, etc. Look at my existential threats to America. The corrupted press, and, as a separate one, the publishing industry. That's exactly what they said here. Number 21, gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures. Gee, have they done that? When's the last time you watched the Oscars? I wouldn't watch the Oscars. It has nothing to do with film anymore. But if you watch the Oscars, it seems to me that they're not even talking about movies or film or their careers or anything. They want to win an award so they can go up on TV and whine and cry about Trump or whatever. Trump derangement syndrome. Or they've got a problem with this political thing or that. It has nothing to do with anything. It's just some actor going up and spewing forth their ideas because they have a forum to do it. All the movies out there are just filled. I mean, if you look at film and TV shows, homosexuality is a perfect example. You know, out of the whole population, you got this many who are actually gay, and yet 90% of the movies out there have some reference in a positive manner about gay and lesbian issues. And this goes back to the 1980s even. Does that make any rational sense? It's not representative of the reality. So why is it all there? It's because people are putting it there deliberately as part of an agenda. And the same thing is true for everything else that these whack jobs believe. Such as believing that, well, we know everything, we're absolutely right. You need to send us food and money and cigarettes because we really can't build anything or do anything under our system, which doesn't work. But we're right. We know what we're doing. We're the ones who have the right answers. You see how stupid these people fundamentally are and always were. Right can only make right for a very short period of time, and even then, it's wrong, you see. Number 22, continue. They were already doing this. Discrediting American culture by degrading all forms of artistic expression. Degrade all of them. Gee, let's see, you have music like, what is it? Don't you hear it coming, day by day? People getting ready for the news. You know, listen to the music. You got the. I'm totally out of key. I know I can't sing anymore because of the fumes I have to breathe in this car. But the music was so wonderful, right? 60s, 70s. What is it today? A boom, boom, a boom, boom. Kill the cops. A boom, boom. Slap the bitches. A boom, boom. Degrade all forms of artistic expression. Have they done that? Have they done that? An American communist cell was told to eliminate all good sculpture from parks. Sculpture, sound familiar? And buildings. Eliminate all good sculpture from parks and buildings and substitute shapeless, awkward, and meaningless forms. In other words, modern art, which isn't art, it's human stupidity. And if you look at things like Pizzagate, which takes you straight over to, again, to the Clintons and Jeffrey Epstein and this whole child trafficking ring and everything, if you look into that, who's one of the big people behind it? This spirit cooker, this witch, this Marina Abramovich. And what does she do? Modern art. Yoko Ono type stuff. Just go out there and scream into a microphone bloody murder, and everyone stands back and goes, oh my gosh, that's brilliant. Before, you would have someone who sang. They had perfect pitch. They had intonation. They much better than I just sang. They would actually be on key, unlike me. But that's because my voice was destroyed by living in a car for 5 years. I can't sing anymore. Eliminate all good sculpture. Have you heard of anybody tearing down, statues lately? Anything of that kind? This was 1963, folks. And again, it doesn't matter where this list originated from. The point is, 60 years ago, somebody was warning in Congress that there were people who were trying to get this to happen in America, and every one of these things is bad. What's happening today, there's something behind it. And if you don't know what it is, you need to put down the pop pipe, turn off the television set, and you need to figure out what it is. But only if you care about yourself, or your children, or your grandchildren. If none of that matters to you, then smoke up. Governor Tim Walz can join you. Number 23, control art critics and directors of art museums. Our plan is to promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art. Let's see, who would be the greatest critics? Again, my big interest is music. Who would be the biggest rock critics? It'd be Rolling Stone magazine, right? Which is just a pile of excrement. It always has been. Gee, what did they say here? Control art critics and directors of art museums. Rolling Stone Record Guide in the late 70s gave like 0 stars, like a box for every Rush album. Today, and at the time, for anyone who understood good music, Rush was considered probably, if not the greatest rock band ever, one of them. Certainly the most influential. right up there with the Beatles, the Who, Led Zeppelin, Rush. They are way at the top, and yet the Rolling Stone record guide's panning every one of them, giving them 0 bucks. You see what I mean? But they will give Mr. Bieber 5 stars. They'll take all of these, boom, boom, cop killer, boom, boom, pull your underwear down, boom, boom. They'll give those guys 5 stars. Control art critics and directors of art museums. Well, we won't even go there. If you want to spend time in an art museum, go for it. If you want to see real art, just open your window and look outside and see what God created. It's more magnificent than anything that Marina Abramovich is doing. Throwing paint on a cross, for example, something like that. Number 24, eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Okay? Remember, 1963, eliminate, now this is verbatim what they said, eliminate the laws, and the reason you'll use to eliminate them is claiming the word censorship. A violation of free speech and free press. That is verbatim the argument that these people use to get it such that now the albums that you hear, the video games, the movies that your little children hear, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, are filled with that kind of crappy vulgarity. This kind of just, I mean, it's one thing to use a swear word to emphasize something. It's another to just be a vulgarian. That's what they're promoting here. Number 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and television. Look at our advertisements. I mean, Bill Hicks, the comedian back in around 1990, he had a gag about, well, if you could allow anything in the news, then every advertisement would just be this. And he described how it would be a woman who just comes out there in a chair naked and starts pleasuring herself in front of the camera. And when she's done, she says, "Drink Coca-Cola." And that would be the advertisement. And that's awfully close to what we have today, isn't it? And again, I'll just go back to that number 25. The reason for promoting all that is to break down cultural standards. In other words, get rid of tradition. Tradition is a foundation. It's something that you stand on that makes you feel like you're on a rock-solid surface. It's a foundation for going through your life with something there that you can lean on as you go through your life and you experiment and you try to figure out what's right and what's wrong. You need a foundation like your family and traditions and a legal system that actually functions, law and order. They're talking about breaking these down. Number 26, gee, I wonder if this one's happened. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity as, quote, normal, natural, and healthy. Gee, has that happened recently? Number 27, infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with, quote, social religion. This is 1963, their words, not mine. Discredit the Bible and emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which does not need a, quote, religious crutch. Discredit the Bible which has all of this morality in there that is basically the foundation of this nation. This isn't the time to show that, but if you study history, you'll understand. Infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion, in other words, from God, with social religion. Have you looked at someone like Rick Warren lately? Social gospel. Everything is about social. They're worried about climate change. They're worried about gay and lesbian. They're worried about this, that, and the other thing. The only thing they're really not worried about is anything that's actually in the Bible that God told us to worry about. And if you read the book of Revelation, for example, in the Christian religion, it talks about how the apostasy of the church in the end times. Before the end, the church is going to go down the toilet by their own choice. The problem is I'm not going there. That's a religious issue, but you see what I mean. Look at me in all these homeless videos when I tell you about going to the church. 100 years ago, the churches were the one place you could go and they would help you. Now they've pawned it all off on the government. They will literally shut the door in your face and lock it. They will turn you away. That's not a church. as defined by the Bible. That's a church that is out for its own purposes. And that's exactly what the Goals of Communism wanted. Okay, the camera overheated even though it's not as warm. It's about 85 degrees outside, so it's about, 90, 95 degrees in the car. Continuing on, number 28. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the grounds that it violates the principle of separation of church and state, in quotation marks. Now, there is no such thing as separation of church and state in the United States. If you read the First Amendment, it's very clear what it says. Congress shall make no law, respecting the establishment of a religion, nor restricting the free exercise thereof. Okay, so Congress cannot establish a state religion and force everyone to worship that religion, and they can't do anything to stop someone else from expressing their own religion. And instead, what we have with the so-called separation of church and state is the government being used as a giant gun that does nothing but restrict everyone from expressing themselves with their own religion. Okay, now here they're talking about specifically, I've got some, golly, that was a little B. Eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in schools in particular. Back in my parents' day, in school, you would start off school with just a brief prayer. And it would just be like something like, Dear Lord, please bless us as we learn today. It wasn't something like, Dear Lord, I declare Jesus King, and anyone who disagrees with me. It wasn't something like that. It was just like, Creator, please bless us as we go about our day learning. Totally harmless, just absolutely harmless. It was not compulsory. It was voluntary. If you didn't want to participate, you just sat back quietly and waited 10 seconds for them to finish. And then you go about your day. Not a big deal. Well, it was this very year that this was entered into the Congressional Record, 1963, is when they went to the Supreme Court and they got prayer thrown out of schools. And they did it on the basis of separation of church and state. That's exactly what they called it. And it was a complete farce. It was the beginning of the Supreme Court really taking over the nation, completely redefining everything that the Constitution very, very clearly says. Congress shall make no law restricting the free exercise thereof, restricting the free exercise thereof, restricting the free exercise thereof. In other words, if you want to get up before school and say a prayer in front of the class, Congress cannot restrict that, you see. There is no separation of church and state. See, the state is there to defend not just that church, but any church. It just can't establish a state religion. Number 29, discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, a hindrance to cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. This was 1963 that those words were entered into the Congressional Record. I have heard that argument my entire life. They're doing exactly what we were warned about. Number 30, discredit the American Founding Fathers. Have you heard of anyone doing that lately? Present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for, quote, the common man. No concern. Let me get this straight. These guys, for the most part, were already the most rich and powerful people in America. Even if King George wanted to triple their taxes, they're still going to be living lives that are better than the kings of the earth prior to King George. They really had nothing to lose, so they went through all that effort over all those decades, put their lives at risk, signed a Declaration of Independence that allowed them to be hanged by the king and have all their property stolen so that their children grow up in poverty. And they did that for themselves with no concern for the common man. Really? Seriously? Seriously? Everything they did was not for themselves. It was for the other 99%. That's why they did it. If they were serving themselves, they would have done nothing. They wouldn't have cared if King George is the king. It didn't matter who's in charge. It doesn't matter. They're rich. It doesn't matter. You don't put everything you have at risk. You don't sign, we pledge our property, our sacred honor. You don't do that on the Declaration of Independence and make yourself a mortal enemy of the King of England if you're looking after yourself. And that's so monumentally stupid that anyone would even suggest that. The American founders cared about everybody. That's exactly why they did what they did. It's the people like King George, or Joseph Stalin, or Adolf Hitler, or Fidel Castro, or Chairman Mao. You see, it's these totalitarian dictators who don't care about common people. They come to power by claiming that they care about people, but then they just basically kill them all. It's called communism. Number 31, belittle. Oops, I'm sorry, I just read that one, my bad. No, I didn't. I was right after all. Belittle all forms of American culture and discourage the teaching of American history on the ground that it was only a minor part of the big picture. Give more emphasis to Russian history since the communists took over. Now remember, when this was published back in '63, it was us against the Soviet Union. China was a swamp. That's all it was. It had nothing. These people, I mean, for all their brilliance and for all their history and all their innovativeness, the revolution in China had destroyed that country. It was just a third world nation. Back then it was Russia. So they're talking about removing American history from the schools and replacing it with history of some other culture that isn't even ours, which makes no rational sense, you see. What are they doing today? Well, now what are they trying to do? They don't want to teach you about Christianity. They want to teach you about Islam. They don't want to teach you about the United States. They want to teach you about the history of China. Something like that. And it's not even real history. It's lies. Belittle all forms of American culture. Is that happening? And what rational, stable American who loves the nation would do that? What would be the purpose of doing such a thing? Why would you do it? You ever hear the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Why would you do that? You see. Number 32, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture, education, social agencies, welfare programs, mental health clinics, etc. So, in other words, support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture. In other words, you're trying to bring socialism into any institution you can in our culture. Well, what did I say about homelessness? It used to be the churches on moral grounds because the Bible commands them to take care of the poor and the widow and the homeless and the sick and the disabled and people in prison. You're supposed to take care of these people. And what do they do today? They pawn it all off on the government and social services, and they use their $1 million sound system to go out there and sing and dance and have a party. It's called the apostasy of the church. But it was created by this kind of thing, who infiltrated the church. But they've done it to all aspects of society. And that's why the homeless are not taken care of. I've said in all these videos about how useless these social service agencies are. The only thing they have is centralized control. There's nowhere else I can go except to these useless organizations because they were never meant to help the homeless in the first place. They were brought to power for this purpose, to weaken our nation. And the people who participate in social services don't even know it because they grew up with such a rotten education. Number 33, eliminate all laws or procedures which interfere with the operation of the communist apparatus. Well, duh. Anything you can do to make spreading communism easier. Number 34, eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities. Now, if you remember Joseph McCarthyism, that was about in the middle of the House Committee on Un-American Activities. And if you look at Hollywood's version of it, they had a movie called, I think, Good Night and Good Luck. It was about Edward R. Murrow taking down Joseph McCarthy, this evil McCarthy. The problem is, it was Hollywood's version of it, and what did they say back here? What did they say? One of their other gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and motion pictures, you see. So that movie, Good Night and Good Luck, about Edward R. Murrow was a little myopic. It painted Joseph McCarthy as this just horrible monster, and someone like Edward R. Murrow, who was a communist, probably next on the list to be taken down by someone like McCarthy. They paint a picture of reality that's 100 degrees opposite of what it really is. Now, whether or not McCarthy was a bit out of control on that is up for debate, but the point is, the Un-American Activities Committee was designed to stop an internal threat to the United States of America. It's no different than national defense against a military invasion. If you're going to have a social invasion, you have to have a defense against it. That's what the House Un-American Activities Committee was. It started in 1938, and it was disbanded, I believe, under good old Jimmy Carter. I think it was, anyway. I'm not positive. I think it was around 79 when it ended, 78, 79. Yeah, it was one of my existential threats is a lack of contingency planning. That's one of the kind of things I'm talking about. A nation that loves itself, that wants to keep itself strong, and does not want to be conquered from within by external forces who want to destroy them and enslave them. They're going to have something like an Un-American committee. It's a fine line walking it to maintain freedom within that. Yes, it's difficult. But military service is difficult. People lose their lives defending this nation. Why should it be any different when you're dealing with domestic enemies? They said just get rid of the whole Un-American Activities Committee. Number 35, discredit and eventually dismantle the FBI. Now remember, this was 1963, not right now. At the time, you had Hoover running the FBI, who was insane. The guy was a madman, right? Cross-dresser, just a freak of nature. This guy turned the FBI into something where they're just gathering files on everybody. Okay? Now, so it was a bad thing. It was really bad the way the FBI was headed, and it hasn't really gotten a whole lot better. But they're not concerned with that. They're concerned with the fact that the FBI is, in fact, the national law enforcement agency that would investigate things like all the other 44 things that they're doing. So they want the investigators out of the picture. So it wasn't like an attack against Hoover, per se. And what we have today is an FBI that actually serves these other 44. That's exactly what all this stuff is going on with Trump. With, well, I mean, you just got to watch it for yourself. This isn't the time to talk about it. But all this stuff going on where the FBI tried to frame Trump and all that, that is because that's exactly what happened, except instead of discrediting and dismantling the FBI, these guys instead changed their tactic after 1963, and they took over the FBI. And again, where did it start? Mainly around the time of Bill Clinton. Number 36, infiltrate and gain control of more unions. The key word in that sentence to me is the word more, which means you've already gained control of and infiltrated some unions. Number 37, infiltrate and gain control of big business. Number 38, transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders, which no one but psychiatrists, also known as experts, can understand or treat. All right, hear what they're saying here. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Almost sounds like they're talking about maybe defunding the police, like reducing the police's power and authority in society, and giving it to what? Social agencies? The very lunatics in Minnesota who have done nothing to help me over the last 5 years, even as they go on TV and talk about how much they're helping the homeless, who are just suffering and dying off camera. These social agencies are the ones who can't do anything right, and they do everything wrong. Just utterly incompetent, biggest waste of our state budgets in almost probably every single state. And you want to give the power to arrest to them? I mean, one of the biggest underlying foundations of child trafficking in America is child protective services. Corruption in there. And you want to give them the power to arrest parents? Look at my video, I forget what it was called, the one where I compared Governor Tim Walz to Georgia Tann, or at least to the influence that they had following a pandemic. Georgia Tann was one of the first major child traffickers in America, and she did it all under the auspices of social services. Just sick and degenerate. Social services should be annihilated, should be gone, absolutely gone, and the police should be strong, but not too strong. But notice this other part, treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders. So in other words, now it isn't like, well, we disagree, so we agree to disagree, and we'll get together every week at the barbershop and we're going to chat and discuss this, and who knows, maybe I'll come to think the way you do if you make good arguments over time, and maybe I'll convince you to believe, the way I do over time. But either way, we're fellows. Let's go out, and then after that we'll go have some fun, have a barbecue or whatever. Now, with these leftists, it's like, you don't agree with me? You've got a mental illness. I'm calling the police. I'm calling social services. You scare me. You disagree with me. You've got a mental problem. I'm going to get a psychiatrist who's going to prove that you have a mental problem. Does that sound familiar? That has mainly happened in my lifetime. I mean, it happened before, but it's really taken off. I have witnessed it from when it didn't exist to where it controls our society today. And remember, all my videos on junk science, psychology, and psychiatry, rock solid foundations of junk science. They're not sciences, folks. They're not sciences at all. Except for the part about, studying brain and a thing like that. But psychiatrists, as much as they claim to be doing that, the majority of them are basically just exalted psychologists, which are complete frauds. Number 39, dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. Well, that's exactly what I just told you. Number 40, discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. Back then, there wasn't much divorce, was there? And I know, as soon as I say that, this is how we've been programmed so badly. As soon as I say that, what came into your mind? Because the leftists control all the media, and they've programmed you to have a instinctive response when someone says that. I say, they didn't have many divorces back in the 50s, but now look at it, 50% of marriages end in divorce. First thing that comes to your mind is what they've been programming you to think. Well, yeah, but back then all the women were being beaten and subjugated by their husbands. They were just treated like house slaves and all. Right? That's what you were thinking, wasn't it? It wasn't it? Doesn't reflect reality, but that's what you've been programmed to believe. Yeah, there were situations between individuals that weren't very good or healthy, just like now, just like always. Always. Even when there really weren't many divorces. See, sometimes making an oath of loyalty to, remember they said get rid of all oaths of loyalty? Well, what are your marriage vows? It's an oath of loyalty to another person. I will stick by you till death do us part. Life isn't easy. It isn't easy for you. It isn't easy for me. But together, we're going to stick it out. We're going to do it. We are going to be the partners. And we're not going to go flying off just to satisfy our genitals. We're going to be responsible adults, and we're going to uphold this oath. The family's been all but destroyed in America. And, it started around this time, didn't it? Planned Parenthood, abortion. What a great way to destroy a family than to just prevent it from getting started in the first place. You didn't have to knock down the World Trade Center. What you could have done was just keep lobbing hand grenades in the construction site when they were building it, and they would never get built in the first place. Or you can just murder 50 million babies, and you won't have any families that you have to destroy. Number 41. Emphasize the need to raise children away from the negative influence of parents. Negative influence of parents. Now, okay, if you turn on your TV today and you look at some of the parents out there, any rational person would start thinking, gee, maybe we should have parent licenses. These people are complete idiots. They're irresponsible. They're drug addicts. They have no business raising children. This was 1963. Okay, what's going on today is a result of what they did here. We have a big problem today, but that's what they were trying to create, was that problem. Back then, when they were warning about it, parents knew what they were doing. You see, I mean, even when there's so many cultures in the world where puberty is where you become an adult, or shortly thereafter. Once you're physically ready to have a family and raise it, it just kind of made sense. Well, why would you be physically ready if you're not ready in every other way? You're allowed to have a family at that point. So what you have even today are a lot of cultures where people do get married at 15, 14 years old, and guess what? They're better at running a family and a household than your average 30-year-old American is. Because that's what they're raised to do. They're not raised to play video games all day. They're not raised to go out and set fires and loot targets. They're not raised to pass fake $20 bills. They're raised to know how to raise a family and maintain a household. So they're able to do it. Well, in America in the 1950s, 60s, children were raised to do that. I mean, when I was in school, we had home economics. What is that? Economics. How to budget, the economics of running a household. They don't have anything of the kind now. You see, that what we're seeing today is the result of their success here. So don't attribute, when someone says something like negative influence of parents, don't immediately start thinking about what you see on TV with these horrible people who are just horrific parents. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about if they had stopped this in the first place, then those people would have been raised properly and they would be raising their children properly. You just got this chain of people having children who don't know how to raise children, so their children don't know how, and it just deteriorates every generation. That's what they were trying to prevent with this warning. And it also says attribute prejudices, mental blocks, and retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. Attribute prejudices. Oh, let's see, they're racist. You're racist. It's because your parents taught you to be racist. It's not that you're actually not racist, you just have a problem with this group over here who behaves like animals. They could have chosen to behave like human beings, but they made a voluntary choice, or they were raised by these rotten parents to behave like animals, so I don't like them. Nothing to do with the color of skin, it's that their behavior is that of an animal, and I'm a human being. So I try to associate with other human beings, not with animals. But they're saying, no, you will attribute those prejudices to the influence of parents. In other words, you're just racist. That's all. You're just racist. Any normal person would want to hang out with someone who has their underwear sticking out of their pants, and women who are, smoking cigars and tattooing slogans on their foreheads, and they can't speak properly. They can't even tell you their own name. They have to say it 4 or 5 times before you understand what their name is, and just basically acting like garbage. You're supposed to want to hang out with people like that, according to the leftists. And if you have a problem with that, then you're just prejudiced. That's all. And, you can look and say, well, let's see, they're black. Maybe they're racist. Maybe that's the reason. Or, no. Oh, no, that one there, he has a lazy eye. You must just hate people with lazy eyes, like mine. That's exactly what they were warning about back here, folks. Mental blocks and retarding of children. You start, remember with psychiatry and everything? You remember all these fake ailments they've created over the years? Attention deficit disorder. They've even convinced people that they have it. There's people who will go out there and defend it. Attention deficit disorder. It's a disorder. Must be something their parents did. Or their parents didn't do. Their parents didn't go out and buy all the pharmaceutical drugs for them. Number 42, create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition. That students and special interest groups should rise up and use united force to solve economic, political, and social problems. No point commenting on it. That's all you've seen the last 3 months. Number 43, overthrow all colonial governments before native populations are ready for self-government. In other words, like, again, this is back in 1963, so you still had vestiges of colonialism. Not just with the UK, the sun never sets on the British Empire, and that was falling apart. But also us, we had the Philippines and all that, all the islands we occupied after World War II. They're saying overthrow the colonial governments before the native populations are ready for self-government. Now, does that sound like people who want to look out for those native populations? Let's see. By definition, they're not ready for self-government, so we want to overthrow the government that is competent that they have right now. Does that sound like these communists are really interested in the people? Or does it sound like the suffering of those people, possibly a couple 100 million of them, is a means to our end? So let's go throw the American overlords out of the Philippines before they're ready to govern themselves, so that it becomes a civil war and all these Filipinos die and their education system goes down the toilet and their health systems and everything else just degrades. Meanwhile, the communists are sitting over there in a nice comfortable room just going, oh, I love it. I love it. This is exactly what we wanted. Creating this mess, and we can come in and give them the solution to the problem that we created. Well, all those people are out there suffering and dying. That's the way communists operate.
We're actually going to get the jobless numbers, the unemployment numbers for the month of June a day earlier than we would otherwise expect them. So we would usually get those on a Friday. They're going to come out tomorrow. That'll tell us unemployment figures for June. Brace yourself. It's going to be absolutely terrible.
And that's why you've got all this uproar, all this stirring up a hornet's nest and chaos and anarchy today. All right, number 44, internationalize the Panama Canal. Now, when they built the Panama Canal, going all the way back to Magellan and Captain Cook and all those people, you had to sail around South America. But the Cape Horn down there at the bottom of South America is one of the most dangerous waters to navigate in the world. It's just it's a graveyard for ships. But also, it takes a long time to sail down around all of South America just to get back essentially to where you started. So they built the Panama Canal and they just cut through the shortest part of the Americas. Well, when they did that, United States was basically running that. We were the major people who built it. So they're saying internationalize it. In other words, take it away from American control, because this controls trade throughout the world. Whoever controls the Panama Canal controls all the trade routes effectively, because, again, your only option is to go around. This is 1963. Now, of course, we gave control of that back to Panama. Number 45, the last one. Repeal the Connolly Reservation so the United States cannot prevent the World Court from seizing jurisdiction over domestic problems. Seizing jurisdiction over nations and individuals alike. All right, now I'll just say one last thing about that. The World Court, when you have the United Nations and all that, and you have this World Court, that sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? It's like, oh man, I've followed my chain of command like I have. I go to my landlord, I go to my city council, I go to my police, I go to the county, I go to the state, I go all the way up the chain to the governor's office, and not one person in Minnesota will do anything about it. So I end up living in a car for 5 years, because these people are lazy bums, they're criminals, they're crooks, they're thugs. They collect paychecks, but they refuse to do the job they're collecting a check for. They're thieves. Corrupt to the core. Useless. Well, where do I go? Well, I would go to the federal government next and say, hey, things like point out the 14th Amendment and things like this. The state is violating my rights. The state, look what the state did to me. I need justice. What if the United States doesn't do anything about it? Where do you go to? You see, there's always going to be a point where you've gone as far as you can, and it's horrible, it's wrong, and it's unfortunate if you don't get satisfaction there, but it's over. Because you can only go so high. One day God will be the final judge, and He'll clean this all up. He'll do it right. But that's in the future. These people will pay the price. But what if if people are not satisfied even with their federal government's response, where do you go? Well, they created this world court, which is supposed to do something like that. So if you got a problem, you can take it to the world court. Or if there's, mainly if there's disputes between two nations, take it to the world court. Such as, what if China did in fact release coronavirus as a weapon against us to totally destroy and disrupt our society? What if they did that? Who do you go to get satisfaction, to get justice there? You either go to war with China, who Bill Clinton turned into a major nuclear power, or you go to a world court. Now, the world court, of course, is part of the United Nations. There's nothing just or rational about it. It's a communist organization, right? It's the equivalent to justice what the World Health Organization is to health, which just means the complete opposite of what they claim to be. So, in the United States, when they made the really bad move in the first place of even signing on with the World Court, they put what's called the Connolly Reservation in there. The Connolly Reservation was, it basically said the World Court will not have jurisdiction over certain things within our society. In other words, the World Court will participate in it, but it cannot become sovereign over what our Constitution defines as our own sovereignty. So in other words, anything that affects an individual or due process of law in our country or at the federal level between the states, the World Court would have no jurisdiction over that because it's already taken care of here where it should be. And they have no business tinkering in someone else's nation. It's basically nation building, taking over a nation. Connolly, if you're going to do something as stupid as sign up for the World Court in the first place, the Connolly Reservation was absolutely necessary. Well, here's number 45 on the list of communist goals. Repeal the Connolly Reservation. Why? Because then all of a sudden you give jurisdiction to what's effectively a communist United Nations over the United States government, which means you no longer have a United States government. You have an external communist influence that has, quote, legal jurisdiction over us, over our federal government, over our elected officials. And the thing I'd point out to you is this. Let's see, who proposed to repeal the Connolly Reservation in accordance with these goals of communism? This was in 1959. The one who proposed before the United States Senate to repeal the Connolly Reservation, a monumentally stupid and suicidal idea, was Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota. The very state I'm stuck in that treats a homeless person like this. And they could have prevented me from being homeless in the first place. All they had to do was the job they're paid to do every single day. And they couldn't be troubled to do that. Hubert Humphrey from Minnesota, someone of this kind of character, these Minnesotans who don't care about anyone but themselves, wanted to repeal the Connolly Reservation, which would have opened up for a communist international, not even government, it's a cabal really, to suddenly have sovereign control over how the United States functions. And that was 60 years ago. You might want to think about that a bit as you listen to my videos talking about the way Minnesota functions as a cult, and the way that while it claims publicly to be the most caring and neighborly and charitable state in the world, the reality is quite a bit different, isn't it? Here's the evidence. Here's the proof. So there you go, folks. 45 goals of communism. Again, it doesn't matter. You can nitpick and debate and cast aspersions here. You can try to the guy who wrote that book was a Mormon. You can go anywhere you want with it. It doesn't matter. Two things to keep in mind. These were put in the Congressional Record in 1963, months before President Kennedy was shot. And every one thing in here is detrimental to our society. In fact, they are existential threats to our society. It doesn't matter where they came from. It doesn't matter if there were no communists who sat down and wrote out these 45 things. The point is, we were warned about them 60 years ago, and they're devastating to our society. And as you can see as I read them, pretty much every single one of them has been fulfilled in our nation already. And who's been doing it? The radical left. Think about it. That's all I have for you. Thanks so much for watching.
To the Congressional Black Caucus who have shaped the bill. But I only will do that if you tell me that this legislation is worthy of George Kirby's name.